we see red state governors slowly and carefully begin to, as their constituents have actually demanded for so long, at least in a lot of places I know, they buck federal precedent, take matters into their own hands, and actually push the envelope, I guess you could say, on the issues that the federal government has no interest in seeing pushed. You see Abbott on the Texas border, who, of course, is thwarted at every turn by the feds. Local officials obviously rejecting gun control. We see places like municipalities in states like Idaho, Arkansas, Florida banning things like drag queens for children, uh, chemical castration of children, and transgender surgeries, and some of these sorts of things. And other places are looking to push those even further. I believe now in Texas there's a bill that seeks to reward families to the point where someone has 10 children, they won't pay any state taxes.
I saw
So,
that. Yeah, it's
so,
pretty amazing. Yeah.
so these kind of things are coming to the fore. Do you see how do you kind of see the whole renegade governor situation go, or the renegade municipality in America? Like, is that something we're going to see more of? And what do you see kind of as the limits as to what that can do before we achieve what I guess you could call like a constitutional crisis?
Right. Right. Yeah, I don't know about that latter point. I mean, what you're talking about, yeah, it's the wave of the future. I mean, given the trends, especially. I mean, as DeSantis and Abbott have shown, they Republican governors and legislatures have everything to gain by going to war with the woke. I mean, no one has demonstrated this better than DeSantis. I mean, he gets into office in 2018. Not even by 1 percentage point against a crack addict, for heaven's sakes. And after 4 years of a relentless campaign against literally everything woke, even Disney, I mean, he even took on Disney, he's reelected by 20-point landslide. And again, he's reelected by a 20-point landslide by a guy who was once, against a guy who was once a Republican, right? So, I mean, this was Chris embodied sort of the consensus fellow. I can bring Republicans and Democrats together. Yeah, who wants that if it's all a bunch of woke leftist nonsense? We have to remember even the left hates the woke. That's so key, right? Wokeness, wokeness obviously is a left-wing, rabidly left-wing manifestation. And I would argue it's a left-wing manifestation of the implosion of social trust that's inherent in liberal multicultural societies. So liberalism in many respects is getting squeezed from both the right demographically because of its sub-replacement levels, but also from the left in terms of wokeness, in that the social trust implosion is now turned into we hate everything Western civilization, right? So, but nevertheless, classic liberals like Bill Maher or Piers Morgan or Dave Rubin, Tim Pool, I believe, even he still classifies himself as a center left or classic liberal. They despise the woke. So what wokeness does is it actually ends up splitting the political left. In that, if you were to ask leftists, do you support any particular woke agenda, transgender athletes, CRT in the classroom, about half will say yes, half will say no. But if you ask the right that question, do you support these woke agendas? 100% of the right will come out and say, not just no, they'll say hell no. So what we're finding is that wokeness splits the left and unites the right. Or better, another way of putting it is people are more likely to come out and vote against wokeness than they are to vote for it. So as long as you have that political formula, as it were, as long as taking on all things woke splits the left and unites the right, red state politicians will see crushing wokeness as the winning formula for a successful political career. So that's why I don't think wokeness has any future. And so putting it all together then, if liberalism, the reigning liberal, post World War II liberal paradigm, is getting squeezed out from the right demographically and from the left in terms of wokeness, then in the end, you only have two options. You only have this new sort of nationalist, populist Christian right and this radical, rabid, frothing wokeness. And that wokeness is causing even people on the left to side with the right. Like, think of Dave Rubin would be a perfect example. And so I think inevitably wokeness collapses, and so nationalist, populist, Christian paradigm becomes the inevitable future in that sense.
When you talked about that 20% thing earlier, for people that don't know, you can check in the other one of the other videos we're going to upload about this conversation. But I think you talked about that you need that 20% to really start influencing the masses in that way. And the woke have maybe kind of had for a little bit that 20% of women, minorities, college educated, certain groups,
Right.
and now the people that didn't fall into any of those categories before that were just kind of drifting have now
Yeah.
coalesced into what's going to eventually become a 20% that'll influence. I mean, at least me personally, like the classical liberals, they're just kind of going to go. They're classical liberalism. I don't even view it as much of a conviction on anything whatsoever. And you kind of
Right.
eventually just move. They're going to, just as they were basically lived with wokeness for 40 years and didn't say anything. They're basically going to then probably have to live with Christian nationalism and not
Yeah.
for after as it goes, because eventually enough of their people that were maybe more to the right to begin with just get funneled into that.
Yeah, yeah, as they are in Idaho right now, or in your neck of the woods in Austin, and inside of this larger red Texas, or in Mississippi or Oklahoma. Yeah, I mean, there's plenty of liberals there. They just learn to kind of go along to get along. It's the reigning paradigm. It's just part of the air you're breathing and the water you're drinking, and it just looks natural and normal. It's really interesting because what people have to understand, if you think of what's happening today as a paradigm shift, you can actually see this play itself out. Because a paradigm, according to Thomas Kuhn, who came up with this notion of paradigm shift, it plays out basically in 5 stages or 5 steps. I forget, it was like chapters 6 to 12 or so in his book, the Structure of Scientific Revolutions. But the first thing of any paradigm, and it's very interesting because it fits very much with what we're talking about. The first thing with any paradigm shift is all paradigms have some kind of anomaly or anomalies to them. For you Greek geeks, anomaly comes from the term anomos. A is the alpha privative. So it denies whatever it's about to say, like an atheist, somebody who believes in no God. Anomos. Nomos is law. We get the word like autonomy, autonomos, self-governing, right? So an anomaly is something that doesn't fit into the way things are supposed to be. And because we're limited, because we're not omniscient, we're not going to understand everything. And every worldview, and that's what a paradigm basically is, every worldview has anomalies. It has things it can't explain. And we generally appeal to mystery at that point. But that's first and foremost what an anomaly is. So, and then secondly, if those anomalies accumulate, the reigning paradigm enters into crisis. It's a crisis mode. And I like to think, if you think of teenagers like anomalies, right? They're cute and cuddly when they're kids, and then all of a sudden they hit adolescence and nobody can understand them. Well, we can reach a crisis mode where my wife and we just don't know how to relate to our teenager anymore, and our family is going through all this stress. So what does my wife, let's make her the good guy here. What does my wife start to do? Well, she starts to consult other parents. She starts to read literature. She starts to go to counseling. And all of a sudden, our teenager makes sense. Our teenager makes complete sense. That's a paradigm shift. In other words, the crisis very organically and naturally, and that's what I think your and my scholarship really tries, our studies really try to track with. What's the organic winds blowing here? Where are things moving? Where are the anomalies, and what is forcing a very organic shift to a different paradigm that will make sense of these anomalies? That's the third stage, the paradigm shift proper, that where now the anomalies, like what we talked about in another video, post-security politics, border insecurities, economic insecurities, cultural insecurities. Now suddenly they make sense. Nationalist, populist, traditionalism. That's what we need in order to heal these insecurities, that kind of thing. But then there's a fourth problem. There's a fourth stage, I should say, and it's a problem. So my wife did all that counseling and reading and consulting. I didn't. I'm still in the old paradigm. So my teenager makes no sense to me. Well, my wife and our teenagers, has a better relationship than ever. All of a sudden, my wife and I start to clash over our teenager. That's what we're experiencing today. That's the clash of civilizations, as it were, that Sam Huntington is talking about. That's globalism versus nationalism. That's secularism versus traditionalism, right? That's a unipolar world versus a multipolar world, however you want to put it. But the best part is the fifth stage. And the fifth stage is revolution. The new paradigm always wins out. Always. Because the old paradigm never overcomes the crisis. And the crisis just gets worse and worse and worse. So it's really interesting. Thomas Kuhn actually says, sometimes you just have to wait for the old paradigm to literally die out. So demographics ultimately takes over with the new paradigm. So the old paradigm, of course, is liberalism. Wokeness is trying to resolve in its own twisted way the lack of the imploding social trust inherent in multiculturalism. So it's tribalizing, it's breaking up into its various ethno-nationalisms and so on. But it's ultimately hateful, it's negative, it has nothing positive, it's parasitical and all that sort of stuff. And so a new paradigm is rising, and that new paradigm is a nationalism that gives you the social trust, and the Christian one for the United States or for the West in general, a renewed conservative Christianity that gives you the fertility factor and a growing demographic. So a kind of Christian nationalism becomes the new paradigm, and it will eventually win out in the end.